I do not have contractions, because to contract means to close off, and I'm not closing myself off. I'm open. My cervix is opening. My baby is flowing through the birthing canal. My baby is getting closer and closer to being in my arms. So why would I close off to that? Why would I resist that? My name is Alba, and I am a trauma liberation coach. I am also a mother of 5 beautiful children, all of which were born at home. I am a wife. I am a nurse that works in addictions. And what else am I, right? I'm a human being. I am someone who is living on purpose. And I'm so excited to be here to share my story with you guys.
All right. Hey, Alba, how you doing this morning?
Hello, I'm doing awesome. How are you doing, Camille?
I'm good. I'm so happy you're sitting down with me. I got to feature your birth, I think 3 years ago in 2018.
Yes.
And you've had 2 more babies since then. And you look incredible.
A total of 5 babies, all of which were born at home.
Oh my goodness. So you've had 5 home births. I know we talked before and you said you had 5 home births. 3 of those were water births and 2 were pain-free. So I definitely want to get in how, like, pain-free. People are probably like, really? So I really want to talk about, your pain-free births. But you also mentioned before that I think your second birth was pretty traumatic, and you kind of were going through some abuse, some depression, and really were just like disconnected from your body, and that created this traumatic birth for you. So I really want you to kind of talk about how you were able to heal and overcome that birth experience and then have 3 births after that were incredible. How did you heal and overcome from that second traumatic experience?
So, well, I'll actually start at the first birth, real quick, because the first 2 births were with the same person. So with it being my first time giving birth and having it be at home, I had no idea what to expect. Well, I just expected the worst, right? Because it's like everything is new and everything is like, oh my God, I have to like push a baby the size of a watermelon out of, you know what I mean? Like, so there's like all of these like unknowns, which obviously come with more fear and more resistance and more pain. Mm-hmm. So I had a typical birth, as you would expect any other birth, at home with no medication with my first one. And with my second one, it was shortly after that. So it was an unplanned pregnancy. And I happened to be in a relationship with someone who's a narcissist. And it was a very toxic time for me. And with it being a toxic time for me, I moved out of the home and then I found out I was pregnant. So I left and then I found out I was pregnant. So it was like one of those like moments where it was just like, oh, this is really a unplanned situation. And when I was in the midst of birth and I had this person who I wasn't in accord with next to me, it allowed me to cope through the birth in a way that I totally detached from the birth. So there was this complete detachment from it. And I just kind of like my body did what it needed to do to kind of go through the birthing motions of birth. And I don't really remember much of anything. It wasn't super anything really. It was just kind of like the physiological processes. I slept through most of it because I just wasn't really feeling it. Yeah. And then afterwards, I didn't quite acknowledge or recognize that I needed healing because there was this coping skill of this detachment that happened. So it wasn't until I was in a healthy relationship and I was excited to plan a pregnancy after having had, 2 pregnancies with somebody who was not, a healthy person for me. And I contacted my midwife who was there for my second birth, and she told me what happened. So from somebody else's perspective, I was able to see just how like not present I was during that birth. Mm-hmm. And when she said it to me, she was just like, you just slept through the whole thing. Like you didn't want to be touched. You didn't want to be bothered. Like you weren't present.
Yeah.
And I was just like, wow, like really? And now mind you, she's telling me my birth story and I'm like
Yeah.
listening to it as if it was the first time I've ever, like I wasn't there, right?
You
And
disassociated.
and it was very interesting because after she told me that, I was determined to have my birth dream. And that's when I started visualizing the kind of birth that I wanted. That's when I decided to write down all of the things that I wanted, including a water birth. I wanted flowers. I started looking at tons of birthing videos of like just really trying to turn this into a dream come true, as opposed to not physically being present for my birth. So the healing happened, you know, with time, with my third child and with my fourth child. And then lastly, with my last daughter that was just born just 3 months ago. She just had her 3-month anniversary, if that counts, because it's not really an
Yes, of
anniversary,
course
but
it
you know how we do, we get
counts.
excited. So she's 3 months old now. And it wasn't until I gave birth to my second daughter that I was able to acknowledge how disconnected I was, not just during the birth, but also during the entire pregnancy.
Mm.
During the entire pregnancy, it wasn't this loving connection with my child growing inside of me.
Mm.
So I cope through it the best way I could in the moment, meaning by totally disconnecting with my body and just not being present. And then it wasn't until after I gave birth to my daughter, my second daughter, that I actually was able to enjoy every single phase and stage and
Yeah.
process, that I was able to recognize the lack of
Right.
connection that I had with
Right.
my other daughter and with the other pregnancy, and how traumatic that was.
Yeah.
Um, so the healing process actually started when I decided to do some more, like, was really reconnecting with my body. So I started to do some more movement and some dancing and really trying to reconnect with my womb space,
Yeah.
and allow that blocked energy to just flow through me. And it was a necessary flow that happened, and it needed to be acknowledged first. So it was like first acknowledging that the pain exists, and then acknowledging the fact that it was just stuck there for all of these years, and now it needs to flow through you. So how can you allow it to flow through you? And the best way I knew how is to do a little
The
shaking,
move.
do a little
Yeah.
movement, move that waist, move that hips, and allow it to flow through. And also just, I had a conversation with my daughter about it, in a way that I was able to be transparent and express it, and know that she wasn't holding that against me, like,
Mm.
so that was also very powerful, to use my voice as well as movement to connect with my body.
So this was while you were pregnant. So when you found out you were pregnant with your daughter, is that when it kind of hit you that you needed to heal and move and get that energy out of there? Was it when you found out you were pregnant with her?
No, and actually it's my fifth.
Oh,
So
your
the
last
order.
daughter. Okay.
Yes. So the order of pregnancy is, I have my son, who was 11 years ago, and I was rather young when I decided to have my first home birth. And it was last minute decision that I was just like, I don't like all these protocols and all these things that I'm going to have to go through. It's not what I want. So my son is my first, and then I had my daughter, those of which are with a different relationship. And then I got married, and then I have my son who's 3. That's the birth that you showed, and then
Okay.
I have my other son who's gonna be 2 in November, and then I have my daughter Larimar, and she was just born 3 months ago, and it was after the birth. So after I was able to have like a truly connected experience of pregnancy and birth of my second daughter, I was able to acknowledge and say, you know what, there was some contrasts here between, the birth that I had and the pregnancy with my daughter and now. And that's when I began the healing process after I gave birth to my last child.
Okay. Well, you mentioned, or we talked about, you had 2 pain-free births. So I kind of want to get into those. And, how did you prepare for those births? Was it a conscious decision? Like, I want this birth to be pain-free, kind of that whole thing. How did you prepare for those pain-free births?
So absolutely, there was a lot of visualizing, a lot of like hypnobirthing, affirmations, and things like that. And I will say that I actually wasn't going for a pain-free birth. I was going for an orgasmic birth. Once I heard about orgasmic births, like years and years and years ago, I said, sign me up for one of those. That's what I want, right?
Yes.
I want to have an orgasmic birth, please and thank you.
Right.
So my goal, well, it wasn't really a goal. I was receptive to it. I was open to having an orgasmic birth.
Right.
And I went to look into different videos again, going into that whole like visualizing and being in a state of openness to the opportunity of that. Right. So that's kind of like what I was going for. So I was not going for a pain-free birth. I was trying to shoot for the moon, shoot for the stars, right? And so in the process of doing a lot of hypnobirthing and a lot of like mental preparation for the birth, and just ultimately having the right vibe, the right people in my corner. The first time that I had a home birth with my husband, he was very nervous because it was his first time. Like, he was born at home. Like, he's one of 11 kids. So a bunch of the brothers were born at home. But for his firstborn, he just wanted to be as safe and cautious as possible. So there was a little bit of a discord with my birthing plan between my husband and I, because I spent more time trying to convince him that this was a good option, as opposed to him just being so supportive of it. So with my second to last birth with Jaciel, who's now 2, my husband was so excited about it. He already knew what to do. We had the pool ready. So there was less discord between my husband and I, which allowed me to be more in a state of flow and in a relaxed state. So I think that played a role in it. And yeah, so that's kind of like what I did leading up to it. And what happened was, it's just kind of like I surrendered to each phase of my birth in order to truly be in a state of flow and openness to this idea of having an orgasmic birth, right? I was like, yes, this would be awesome. So by being in a state of flow and surrendering to each phase of birth, I was in just such a relaxed and zen space that it allowed me to truly have this pain-free birth. And it was interesting because I didn't realize that I didn't have any pain until after. I was like recalling, I'm like, at what point in this birth, like, meaning I have my baby in my hand and I'm at all of the pheromones and I'm just all excited. I'm so happy. And I'm trying to think back at the pushing, like, did I have any pain? I'm like, I didn't feel anything that was, unbearable or so uncomfortable to the point of like any discomfort that was even remotely compared to my first or my second or even my third. And I'm like asking around to the people that were there. I'm like, did you notice that I had, like, no, you was just so relaxed. You was just so this, you was just so, I said, I didn't have any pain. And I was kind of in disbelief and shock about it too. So then after I was able to experience that with Jaciel, I was like, oh yeah, we definitely doing this again with Larimar, like for sure. Because I already knew that all I had to ultimately do was be in a safe space in my own home and surrender to each phase and just be in a state of openness. So I used the same formula for the last one and I was able to experience the same thing. So it was really awesome. Still no orgasmic birth yet. I'm not done yet though. I'm gonna try again for this orgasmic birth. Maybe number 6 is a charm.
Well, for women who are, preparing or hoping or wanting or even maybe considering an unmedicated birth but don't know, like, oh, my pain tolerance, I don't have a high pain tolerance, or I don't think I can do it. What advice would you give them in order to let them know you can do it, you're capable, and kind of how to surrender? How do you surrender to the pain?
Okay. So what I would say first to that is just like, a lot of it is, it's a mental thing. Like, we have been fed so many different images about what birth is not, which is that it's short, right? Like you see it on video, on TV, and it's like the person's water breaks, they rush to the hospital. Next thing you know, like the baby's born. That's not true. That's not how birth happens. And it's turned into a huge like medical intervention thing, and that's not necessary either. Like none of these medical interventions are necessary in order for us to give birth. So we have given our power away by, as women, by having somebody else be the expert in birth, as opposed to our body and the way it was built naturally to give birth. So I think the first step is to cancel out the lie that birth is this microwave process, or that birth is something that happens to you as opposed to something that you experience and happens, right? So one of the first things that I learned years and years and years ago is that I don't give any birth worker my power. I don't say that you delivered my baby. I delivered my baby. You assisted, you witnessed, you were present, but you didn't actually deliver my baby. I did. So words are very powerful. And the moment we start like, we remember to kind of maintain our empowerment and keep that power, is the moment we are able to truly begin to embody our power and our experience as women. So that's one of the first things I would say, is don't give anyone else credit for what your body does naturally. Right. I don't give any of the doctors, midwives, any of that credit for what God created within me, which is this, childbearing hips, this really amazing organ that is created out of nowhere to harbor or to hold onto my child, right? So that's that. But then also it's just understanding that when you're in a hospital setting, everything is set up for you to fail in natural birth. And that's just the reality of it. Is I'm a nurse. I've witnessed multiple births in the hospital. I've witnessed C-sections. I've been in that setting enough for me to acknowledge and recognize and see some of these things that happen, right? So it doesn't mean that you can't have an unmedicated birth in the hospital. It doesn't mean that you can't have a positive experience in a hospital. Absolutely not. But and the things that they do is preparing for the possibility of them needing to intervene. So for example, when you come in, you are seen as similar to, I was a waitress. So it's like turning tables, right? Mm-hmm. So they want to turn those beds. So they have a capacity of, let's say, 10 beds in that labor and delivery room. So the quicker they can get you in and out, the quicker they can get somebody else in that seat, right? Similar to turning tables in a restaurant. Yeah. So there's that process where it's like you're seen as a value or a transaction, I should say. So that's, nobody likes to be seen as a transaction, right? So there's that transactional piece, which is part of the business model of like the business of birthing, which, by the way, is a really good video to watch. I think it's Ricky Lake who did that video, but it's
being born. Mm-hmm.
Yes, the business of being born. So that was one of the first videos that I that opened me up to home birth as well. So there's that aspect of it. Then there's the whole like trying to expedite or speed things up, and it makes sense and it aligns with the natural process of what a woman wants at that time, which is to meet her baby and to not be pregnant anymore. But there are different ways to view that. There are different ways to process that, right? So for example, they want to give you Pitocin. They want to give you, all the things that are going to help speed things along. Again, this is part of the business model of birthing, not part of the natural process. So when you do that, you're actually going against the natural process, and you're creating a domino effect where now one intervention leads to another intervention, leads to another intervention, leads to another intervention, until ultimately you don't have control control over your birth anymore. So when they start giving you different medications, now they have to do ongoing monitoring, the continuous fetal monitoring, right? And studies have shown that the continuous fetal monitoring don't actually do anything to improve the outcome of mom or baby. All it does is increase the likelihood that a person will have a C-section, because normally there are all of these risks and things that happen during birth that if you don't have someone continuously monitoring it, you don't know that this stuff is happening. It's just happening inside of you and it's fine. But when you now have this monitor on you 24/7 or whatever, like, continuous, now any little deviation will be like, oh, we must intervene. We have to XYZ. And the same thing goes with, from the moment you walk in the hospital, your NPO, nothing by mouth. You cannot have a slice of pizza. You cannot have no applesauce. You cannot have nothing, because we're preparing you for the possibility of having to do a C-section. And if we do a C-section, we have to give you medication that could cause you to vomit and aspirate. So all of those interventions, or all of the ways that they set things up, is not for, it's for the possibility of them needing to intervene and do a C-section.
Right.
So that's why I say it's set up for failure, not because you are not capable of it, but because one intervention leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, like a domino effect. Right. So how do you handle the idea or the process of like, oh, I don't want to be pregnant anymore? So one of the things that I understand about the process of having a baby inside of you and growing for 9 months, and then ultimately at the end of it, you're over it, right? It's all intentional. It, like, there is such a miraculous thing about birth that I'm just like so in awe all the time. Like, I love being pregnant. I love pregnant women. I love the woman body. It's amazing. So you go from being one, right? You're your own person. And now you have a baby growing inside of you. And once you start to feel the movement and you feel yourself grow, and you have like this pregnancy glow, you actually start to enjoy the idea of this baby being inside of you, right? And it becomes a part of you, just the same way your finger is a part of your body. So you're connected with your baby from the inside. And then you're going to have to dispel or release or kind of let go of this attachment, and now have this baby outside of you. And what happens at that time, aside from the loss of the blood and the hormones and the actual baby, which all cause like these shifts to happen in your body, it's a loss nonetheless. So for example, if somebody were to lose a toe, or to lose, to have an above the knee amputation, there's a grief that happens. There's a loss that happens. So in order to avoid that feeling of loss when you give birth, God makes things really, 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 really uncomfortable for you during the last 9 months of pregnancy. You can't walk, you can't sleep, you can't there's so many things that are just so uncomfortable about the birth, to the point where you're like, oh my God, I can't wait to get this baby out of me, right? So when somebody is that way, I'm like, awesome, that's amazing. This is exactly what you should be feeling, because when you do give birth, you're going to be able to expel this part of you without feeling that grief, without feeling that loss of an appendage or a part of you being gone. So like, I'm always very excited when somebody's like at the end and they're like, oh, I'm so over it. I can't, right? Because it's intentional. And when you do understand that process, and understand that pregnancy didn't happen overnight, and everything happens in stages, and nothing is microwavable, I actually learned to appreciate even more the divine timing of everything. So I'm not over here thinking and giving more power to for example, the doctor that says, oh, this is your gestational day, and this is the day that you're expected to give birth. That means nothing to me. It literally doesn't mean anything to me. So because we're so stuck on the expected due date, anytime that we're not like on time. On
Mm-hmm.
time for what, right?
Yeah.
On time for this due date. We're over it. We're like, I'm late. I need to get this baby out of me.
Yeah.
Late for what? Like,
Mhm.
your baby's gonna come right on time, honey,
Yeah.
right on time. And it's so important for us to understand the divine timing of it, as opposed to put so much emphasis on things outside of ourselves, including science.
Mm.
Science makes mistakes, right?
Mm.
An ultrasound could, guesstimate your birth, but what if your baby happens to be a little bit smaller or a little bit bigger than the expected time at, for this stage of the birth? So I find that it's very important for us to trust our bodies, to connect with the divine timing of it all, so that when the time comes that so one of the things I say too, again, because words are powerful, someone will be like, when's your due date? My guess date is November
Right.
1st,
When
but
I
my
was
baby could come at any time.
right, my midwife had a great analogy when I was pregnant. That think of like a fruit tree, an apple tree, right? It grows and the fruit fall off at different times. The fruit knows when it's ready.
Mm-hmm.
So even though it all started growing at the same time, each fruit is different. Each fruit is going to fall when it's ready. I loved that analogy. And that's just like babies. Babies know. They know when they're ready. But I wanted to go back to what you were. It sounds like when you prepared, you educated yourself a lot. You educated yourself on the hospital, kind of the environment of the hospital, what would be good for you, or that what the hospital setting was wouldn't be conducive to the experience that you wanted for yourself. So you educated yourself. You also you learned about birth, like what your body does during birth, and that allowed you to surrender to the phases of birth. And I think that's such a good advice to someone wanting to have that experience. It's like, educate yourself, prepare, learn what your body's doing during birth. But I wanted to ask you, during your birth, was there ever a time where it got really intense and you maybe question, oh, I don't know if I could do this, or how long is this? Was there ever a moment that you had to overcome that maybe some negative self-talk or something like that?
For sure. More so with my first birth, because as much as you prepare, there's nothing like the ring of fire. This is a secret, y'all. The ring of fire, in case you don't know, when it comes time for that head to come out, you feel this ring of fire and you have to push even though there's a ring of fire happening, right? And as much as I prepared, I didn't know what this ring of fire was. I didn't know what it felt like, nothing. So I had this midwife that was actually assisting the midwife that I had, and she was next to me. And at that moment where it was time to push this baby's head out, now mind you, I was in labor for like 26 hours or so. So I was definitely over it.
Yeah.
And I had a midwife that didn't want to intervene at all. My water hadn't broken yet. And I'm like, can you break my water? And she's like, let's allow the natural process of it and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I guess. And time went on again. And I'm like, nothing's happening. So can you just break my water? And she's like, whatever. I said, if you don't break this water right now, okay, if you don't do this, we're going to have problems. Right. So she ended up helping me with the water, breaking thing or whatever, which is something that can happen at home. It's one of the interventions that we do have available for home birth. But anyways, so when I had this midwife next to me, and I was just like, I felt like, all right, I'm exhausted. It is like 4 a.m. I've been in labor all day and all night. Like, I'm over this. I'm so over this. And now there's this sensation, this uncomfortable feeling. And I couldn't even identify what the heck this was. It was just too much. It was too much. And then she was like, that's the ring of fire. Push through that. And I was just like, so when she gave me words to explain what it was that I was feeling, and said, now is your time. Like, it's action time. It's go time. Push. I was able to feel it, identify it, and push anyways. And then baby's head was out. Once baby's head was out, the rest of it was just like smooth sailing. But that moment where I started to feel that pain of the baby's head coming out, I was ready to say, we go to the hospital right now. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. It's too much.
That requires real. It is real.
It definitely was not going to happen, because you are not going to be, on your way to the hospital with the baby's head coming out, right? So one of the things to understand about having a home birth is that at the point where it becomes too much, that's usually the time where you're about to give birth, right? So it's almost over. So to be able to push through that is how you can allow your mind, you should really like try to tap into some mental focus, whether it's some hypnobirthing that you've done in the past, or something that you can do to just push through that moment, because the last thing you want to do is be heading to the hospital while you're about to push this baby out and then give birth in the car. That's not the most romantic birth. It's definitely not the most orgasmic birth, but
right.
Just say it. So definitely once you get to that point where you're just like, I can't do it anymore, you are so close. You are so close. You can like feel your baby right there. So just push anyways, and then it's over. And here come all these happy hormones ready to, love on you and your baby.
Yes. That oxytocin high. Whew.
It's amazing. You feel like you can conquer the world.
Literally, there's nothing like the oxytocin high, really. Like, I love it so much. I kind of want to go back, because you mentioned during your birth, just, surrendering. If you could give advice to someone on how to really surrender, like, what does that look like? What did you do? How are you moving? Are you breathing? What are you telling yourself while you're surrendering? What does that look like?
The thing is that I'm very philosophical. So I'll philosophically explain it and then go into the bodily explaining. Because for me, what surrendering is, it is a death and celebration at the same time. It's allowing certain things that are uncomfortable, or some suffering or some pain to exist and flow, in order for you to get to a state of joy, acceptance, and celebration. So that's ultimately like the philosophical idea of it. But the understanding is that birth happens in different stages. You have first the conception of, what it means. You and your body's trying to reject this thing inside of you. So you're throwing up and you're uncomfortable and all of that. And that passes. And you have to be willing to accept that in order for the phase to move on to the next phase, and so on. At least not resist it as much as, actually, nobody likes throwing up. Let me skip over that. We can edit that out. Maybe not. But when it comes to the actual birthing process, you have the Braxton Hicks contractions, which is just preparing you for birth. So your body's practicing these contractions, and they're uncomfortable, but the moment you accept it, it's like, oh, that's over now. Wonderful. Then you go on to the next phase, and the next phase, and the next phase. And when you're in the pre-labor stages, and you're experiencing these uncomfortable contractions, but you can talk through them, there's enough time in between for you to be able to kind of rest and walk around and all of that. To accept that, and to surrender, and to kind of open up in that moment, instead of resist it and close yourself off, it allows you to actually flow through that stage in a way that is smoother, in order for you to allow the next phase to come of the birth. And for me, one of the things that I do is I have a mantra that I say that allows me to also surrender and be in that moment of power. I draw strength from all of the powerful women that gave birth before me, and I give strength to all of the powerful women that will give birth after me. So that mantra also allows me to remember the greatness that is within me and the capacity that I have to be able to give birth to my baby. So the less you resist, because the opposite of surrender is to resist. And when you resist, you're contracting. When you resist, you're closing yourself off, and you're actually making the process a lot more uncomfortable and a lot more painful than it needs to be. So I actually don't call contractions contractions. I don't.
What do you call
They're
them?
surges. They're surges. They're waves. That's it.
Yep.
It's something that flows through me, and then next thing you know, I'm chilling.
Right. It's all about
And then
perspective.
it's all about perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So I do not have contractions, because to contract means to close off.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not closing myself off. I'm open. My cervix is opening. My baby is flowing through the birthing canal. My baby is getting closer and closer to being in my arms. So why would I close off to that? Why would I resist that? So for me, a big part of the surrendering process is to be open, to accept, and to truly be in a state of flow.
Yeah. Yes. For me, it was a matter of changing, painful to it was powerful. My birth was not painful. It was powerful. It was intense. It was the most intense feelings that my body had ever experienced. But if you switch, their mindset that you're experiencing pain, it's happening to you. It's like, no, this is of me, So I think for women who are trying to prepare for this unmedicated birth or thinking about it, I think it's important for, just shift your perspective. Don't believe the things that birth are supposed to be, or we're told that it's supposed to be. I love, that's
Exactly.
beautiful how you even your mantra, that's such a powerful mantra, just kind of pulling from the power of your ancestors, I love that. So I also want to know, kind of, when you were preparing, because you have 5 home births, and I know when I was preparing, a lot of people, no one I knew had a home birth, so did anyone, look at you like you were crazy? Kind of, did you get looks, or your family? What were people saying, and how did you kind of just know, like, no, this is my decision, this is the route I'm going to take?
It got easier with time, because I had evidence to show that this was a possibility. But with the first birth, especially with it being more of a last, like I was like 8 months pregnant by the time I decided I was going to do a home birth. So it was definitely, I was certain that I wanted it, but for anyone else, it looked like I was crazy, for sure. My mother in particular. So my mom didn't have a positive experience giving birth to my brother or myself. She had 2 C-sections. And with her experience, she felt like hospitals are a very necessary part of birth, because that was a necessary part of her birth. So their distorted narratives end up like they end up trying to narrate your story or narrate your birth. And it is difficult to be able to tune that out. And one of the things that I did was I had a designated person to talk to my mom, because I couldn't talk to her. Like I couldn't talk to her when I was in the different stages of labor. I couldn't talk to her because it wasn't going to help me relax. It wasn't going to help me be present. It wasn't going to help me to connect with my body and to feel powerful. Because if somebody is telling you that this is not going to work, somebody's telling you that you should go to the hospital, or their anxieties are rubbing off on you because they're afraid for your life while you're trying to bring forth life in the most natural way, it is not helpful. So sometimes we have to tune out or turn down the volume of the voices of those around us that are telling us that we can't do it. And it has to do a lot with their fears and their experiences. And it doesn't mean that has to be your fear or your experience. So that's something that I had to do. And then with time, being able to like listen to somebody who has their personal like traumatic or painful or kind of idea of how birth should be, and not allow it to become your narrative. So it's like, you're the narrator of your story, but just because that's your story and the way you view birth, that doesn't mean that has to be how I view birth. So I try to kind of refrain from the us and we statements. Like, we're not the same. Like, for me, my experience is such. For me, my desire is this. For me, this is how I visualize my birth. For me, this is how I prepare for my birth. So trying to refrain from the us statements and the we statements and have it be like, this is what I desire. So yeah.
Okay. That's a great point. Even like what you consume, don't consume, or people want to watch birth stories and it makes them feel anxious. Don't consume that, don't be around, don't listen to people's negative birth stories. Even if it's your family, don't have people in the birth room that aren't, if that anxiety is going to rub off on you, just don't even have them present. I think that's, like you mentioned earlier, just kind of owning and being in your power. That is a part of being in your power, so that's a great point. I think I kind of want to leave with, with you having experienced the trauma and, even sexual trauma, if someone, which is unfortunately a lot of women's reality, and what advice could you give for someone who has that trauma and wants this beautiful birth experience, but because of the trauma thinks maybe it's not for them? Or what advice would you give that person watching or listening?
So what I would say is, birthing has been very healing for me, in terms of connecting with my body and being in my power and in my truth. Because what the trauma did to me is it made me feel powerless. It made me, feel like I didn't have a voice. It took away at least what I thought. It was like it was an illusion that my power was taken from me, or that I was no longer whole, or that I was no longer pure, right? I understand now from a healed perspective that it was an illusion and it was something that I allowed to happen, which is to believe the distorted narrative of what was told to me, or what was not true. So, to have a natural home birth and to be able to kind of narrate your own vision, have your birthing dream come true, have your voice be heard, is the most healing experience that you could have. And to truly connect with your body, because what happens in trauma is you disconnect.
Yeah.
Your body ends up being that sacrifice and you end up mentally going somewhere else, right? So in understanding the disconnection that happens, it's important to understand that reconnecting with your body in a way that is powerful, in a way that is ultimately, reconnects you, or you have this almost this rebirth that happens, is very amazing. And oftentimes, being in a position where you're a part of, at least for me, when you're a part of a system or an organization, for example, a hospital, that is trying to exude power over you, or trying to dictate how things will go or how things won't go, and are even invasive in a way that, oh, you're just one of many vaginas that I've seen today. So what if I don't invite or ask to be invited into this space? I just choose to go into your body without actually, asking for permission first. Because for them, it's nothing but a thing, because they do it all the time, all day. But it's uncomfortable for me, and it's actually triggering for me to be in a space where my sexual organs, or my physical body that already experienced a certain state of violation or trauma, is now being re-traumatized or re-triggered to the point where I can't relax. I can't, because there's a man in the room, and it just so happens that the only doctor that's on is a male, and I'm triggered by having a man in this space. So I don't have an option at this time. So there's so many things that within that process that make me feel powerless and trigger me to the point where I can't give birth in a hospital without being triggered.
Right.
If I am in a state where I'm in a medical emergency situation, and in order for me to be safe, or my child to be safe, I will put the safety and security of me and my child aside and deal with the triggers. But it's definitely very traumatizing and triggering for me to give birth in a hospital, because I know that my voice, my body, my desires don't exactly align with the medical model. So if I say that, like, hey, it just kind of looks weird, because I'm like, trying to tell you how you should, be respectful or introduce yourself or say certain things that will help me feel more safe. And for you, you're just like, this is nothing. Like, you're dismissing my reality. Like, that is not safe for me. It's actually gaslighting, and I don't like that, right? So a lot of the things that happen within the medical model, from what I've seen and from what I've experienced, because I've had to be in the hospital when I was pregnant because I was in a car accident, and what I experienced further validated the reality that this space is not the safest space for someone like me, who has experienced sexual trauma and who needs to be in control of her own body, and needs to feel empowered. This doesn't help me feel empowered. It actually helps me to feel hopeless or powerless, or feeling like I have to just give somebody control over my body, and that this doesn't feel safe to me.
That's such a great point. And just thank you for your courage and vulnerability. And I hope that, whoever is watching or listening can find some healing, even just from your own testimony, and just allows them to take charge of their power, their birth experience. And that may mean birthing outside of a hospital, and creating the birth team around you of people you trust and love and where you feel safe. I think is so important for just everyone. But I wanted to leave with your beautiful birth experiences, and just if you could describe those positive, beautiful births in 3 words, if you could describe it in 3 words, what would it be?
Everyone's gonna think I'm crazy. I don't even want to answer these. Relaxing, loving, and just joyful. I had so much joy giving birth, especially the past 2 births that I had. It was just so much joy, and I was in such a flow, in a state of relax. I'm in my zen, and at no point did I resist the inevitable. I'm going to have another contraction. It's inevitable. It's necessary. And not even contraction. I'm going to have another surge. I'm going to have another wave. It's inevitable. So let me just surrender to that. Let me enjoy the fact that right now I'm resting. Right now, I'm in between, and this feels good. This feels relaxing. The water feels nice and warm and buoyant. I'm like kind of floating in the water. This feels nice. So to just be able to be in a loving space, feel that joy, and allow myself to relax was how I would describe my breaths.
Wow, a loving, relaxing, joyful birth. So beautiful. And there's so much more I wish I could have talked to Alba about with the amount of intention she set with her pregnancy, from the flowers she chose, the sunflowers, the roses. But I hope her story is inspiring. We're changing the narrative of childbirth at Wombman Crush. So if you're not following us, follow us on Instagram at Wombman Crush. Share this story with a friend. And if you would like to be featured as my next Wombman Crush, please contact me at wombmancrush@gmail.com.